As we look to the future, it's going to be very difficult for this president to lead if, in fact, moral authority remains compromised.
The moral authority of the president compromised. That was Republican Senator Tim Scott, who's been very critical in recent days of President Trump. Right now, the president is in Bedminster, New Jersey, where he is spending the final hours of his working vacation. CNN's Boris Sanchez is nearby in Bridgewater, New Jersey. Boris, the president returning to the White House, but he's not going to be there for long.
That's right, Jim. This 17-day working vacation for President Trump in Bedminster, New Jersey is almost over. He's just a few hours away from heading back to Washington, D.C. before then going on to Arizona later this week. But the White House is still reeling from the criticism the president has received after his divisive remarks about the violence in Charlottesville last week. And we've seen the fallout not just in criticism from members of the president's own party, but the implosion of the specialized councils that the president had put together on manufacturing and strategy and policy, and the infrastructure council. We've also seen several charities fleeing events that were scheduled to be held at the president's estate in Mar-a-Lago. All of that, though, still the main focus here in Bedminster, as several people are now coming forward to defend the president. One of them, Jerry Falwell Jr., the evangelist, was actually on ABC earlier today saying that the president's response to the violence in Charlottesville was appropriate. Listen to some of what he said.
The bold and truthful statements I was referring to were his willingness to call evil and terrorism by its name, to identify the groups, the Nazis, the KKK, the white supremacists. That's something a leader should do, and I admire him for that. He's substance over form. So many of our politicians, recent leaders, national leaders, have been form over substance. They tell people what they want to hear. They sugarcoat everything, or they have sugarcoated everything. And I think the American people have gotten sort of thin-skinned, and I think they need to listen to the substance of what he said. One of the reasons I supported him, because he doesn't say what's politically correct. He says what's in his heart, what he believes. And sometimes that gets him in trouble. But he does not have a racist bone in his body. I know him well. He is working so hard to help minorities and people in the inner cities up through. He says that school choice is the civil rights issue of our time. Betsy DeVos has been traveling around the country trying to promote school choice to help inner city youth get to choose which schools they attend and not be stuck in a public school that's failing in a big city. And he's doing so many other things to bring jobs back to the inner city.
Now, Falwell went on to give a very interesting answer to a question trying to clarify what the president meant when he said that there were good people on both sides, referring to counter-protesters and Nazis. And Falwell said that it's very possible that the president might have specific inside information that the rest of us don't. Still unclear exactly what he meant by that. Getting back to the president's schedule this week as he heads to Arizona on Tuesday, he's scheduled to take part of some tours in Yuma before then heading on to Phoenix later on Tuesday night to take part of a rally. Several Republicans, including Ohio Governor John Kasich, pleaded with the president on the Sunday morning shows earlier today to be more inclusive in his language. Others, including the mayor of Phoenix, Greg Stanton, said the president should perhaps delay this event in light of the divisive comments that he made again last week on Tuesday, Jim.
Boris Sanchez there with the president in New Jersey. Be sure to watch Paul Ryan's town hall tomorrow right here on CNN, 9 o'clock Eastern time, and we'll be right back. A sobering new warning from North Korea today. Pyongyang saying it is ready to, quote, mercilessly strike at any time. This warning comes as the U.S. and South Korea prepare to begin just a few hours from now joint military exercises. North Korea says those exercises are reckless, warning that they bring the two countries closer to nuclear war. Secretary of Defense James Mattis says there is no reason to see the exercises, however, as a provocation.
That we're very transparent on what we're doing just to avoid miscalculation. North Korea knows this is a wholly defensive, for whatever they may say for public consumption. They know this is a defensive exercise. It's been going on, for decades. I mean, the name has changed over the years, but it's the same exercise that's been going on. So it's calculated to not allow for miscalculation.
The U.S. military says those drills will go ahead as planned starting tomorrow, Asia time, coming tonight, U.S. time. I want to bring in CNN's Kyung La, who is in Tokyo, David Rode, online news director at The New Yorker, and CNN global affairs analyst, and CNN military analyst, Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona. He is a former military attaché in Syria. Kyung, I want to start with you because you're in the region there. We're at the end of 2 volatile weeks, at least in rhetorical terms, where the president laid out that famous fire and fury comment, and you had the reactions in the region, the sort of rhetorical one-upmanship coming from North Korea, threats of firing missiles towards Guam. What is the feeling in the region right now? Are things calming down? Is there concern still about a military versus a rhetorical escalation there?
What everyone's watching for is what are the ground troop movements? Are there anything, does there appear to be any movement out of North Korea? That's what the region is watching for. As far as the average person, sure, there are some nerves out here from Japan to South Korea, but it's really the movement on the ground that people look for here. It is not necessarily the start of the exercises that has the region concerned, at least when it comes to the Far East from Japan and South Korea. It's whether or not North Korea responds quickly. If you look at the history of how North Korea has responded, it's nuclear tests, it's launching ballistic missiles from submarines. That has been what North Korea does. And we do anticipate, if you speak to military experts, especially here in Japan, they do anticipate some sort of a response. Exactly what that response will be, you just have to wait to see. And even if they will respond, that's really going to tell us something, Jim. If North Korea doesn't respond, then that tells us a lot about the war of words.
Rick Francona, going into these last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of talk from the White House, from the president, that the president has a different approach to this. He's going to be tougher. What's the bottom line here? Has U.S. strategy actually changed with regards to North Korea? Have they pushed North Korea somehow in a better direction than they were a couple of weeks or a couple of months ago, or when the president came into office? Or are we going back into that same sort of I don't know if it's equilibrium is the right word, but the same back and forth that the U.S. and North Korea have had for a number of years?
I think that's what's happening, Jim. I think it's ratcheting back down, and I think we saw a key move by the North Koreans when the leader decided to call off planned demonstration warning shots against Guam. And I think that really started to diffuse the tension. And I think what we're seeing now is we're diffusing the crisis, but the problem's not going away. We will continue to have this almost brinkmanship with North Korea. And the start of this exercise will be very key. And Kyung brings up a really good point. Let's see what happens with the North Koreans on the ground. If they don't respond, I think that they're actually sending a signal that they really would like to lower the temperature on the peninsula. And I think that would probably be a wise move. And I think if you look at the U.S. portion of this exercise, and it's a multinational exercise, it's not just South Korea and the United States, there are a bunch of other nations as well. This is going to be a command post exercise where they're mostly exercising the staff functions of coordinating the various militaries of all these countries. So we're not going to see a whole lot of U.S. forces, South Korean forces moving. There'll be some of that, but very, very limited.
And we should note that these exercises happen every year. They're very regular, and North Korea always makes us think about it, but the exercises tend to go forward. David, I want to ask you this. Steve Bannon, the former chief strategist to the president, in one of his quote-unquote exit interviews last week, he told a reporter that there really is no military option for North Korea, that the president was almost misleading, it seemed to be saying. Bannon seemed to be saying about there being military option, that too many millions, in his words, would die in South Korea. Was he speaking the truth, in effect there, revealing the actual thinking even inside the Trump administration regarding a military option?
I think he's, revealing more of his own thinking. I mean, Bannon was well known for he did not favor interventions overseas, and he was a voice against the missile strike in Syria, for example. But I do think he was just speaking for himself. But he's reflecting, the view of many, many experts, and frankly, the view of the South Korean government, that this saber rattling by the Trump administration, if there actually were a use of military force, it could result in tens of thousands of South Korean casualties, particularly around Seoul. So there isn't a good military option. To be fair to the administration, the statement today came from the state newspaper, not from Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. And I think they have backed off a bit since President Trump made these much more serious threats. And I agree with what's been said. Let's see how they respond to these exercises. If they stay quiet, that shows that this tough Trump approach might be working.
Rick, the other issue that front and center for the White House has been a decision on an Afghanistan strategy change. Just a short time ago, General Mattis said, quote, that the president has made a decision on Afghanistan, wants to announce it to the American people. He added that he's staying silent on exactly what that decision is, and it's up to the president to announce it. What are the options on the table for the president, Rick Francona, regarding Afghanistan? What could we see? More troops, fewer troops? What are the actual choices that the president faced here?
I think that most of what they were discussing was, are we going to increase U.S. troop levels and actually put American combat forces back on the ground and change the mission of U.S. forces from the train and advise and assist into actually ground combat again. And we may see a hybrid decision. We may see American combat forces going into that the ISIS Khorasan area, that southeast of Jalalabad, to take that out, because I think that they regard that as one of the priorities of this, and continue the train and assist mission. But I think the president's going to take a really hard line on what's going on, because if you look at what's going on, we've been doing it for 16 years. And what have we got to show for it? We still haven't created a credible Afghan force. The government's in shambles. There's an ongoing civil war. And even the Secretary of Defense said that the Taliban has the upper hand on the ground. So I think we can expect to see a decision that American forces are going to go after ISIS. But after about anything else, Jim, I really don't know. And I think we're all waiting to see how the president articulates what our policies going forward.
America's longest war, and Americans are still dying there. Some died just in the last couple of weeks. Rick, Kyung-la, David Rode, thanks very much for joining us. President's approval ratings plummet in 3 key states. Could this be a sign that he's losing support from the voters who helped send him to the White House? We're going to talk. A harsh and alarming new threat from North Korea. Pyongyang says it is ready to, quote, mercilessly strike at any time. The warning comes as the U.S. and South Korea prepare for joint military drills. That's not an accident. North Korea is always very angry about these drills. North Korea says those exercises are reckless and bring the 2 countries to the brink of nuclear war. This morning on CNN, Ohio Governor and former presidential candidate John Kasich warned of waiting too long to act against the North Korean regime.
If I were the President of the United States and we had a regime like North Korea, and they were able to develop the technology to target the United States of America, we would have no choice but to take those systems out. No choice. And it would change the very fabric of that peninsula.
You would not only not rule out, but you would enact a preemptive strike if North Korea were proven to be establishing and developing nuclear-capable ICBMs that could hit the United States?
Let me put it to you, yeah. Well, let me put it to you this way, Jake. I wouldn't take a chance on a government that unstable and a leader who's that erratic to be able to have the capability to launch and to land a missile in Los Angeles and kill people there. Yes, I would reserve that right, and I would make it clear to the Chinese. I would send an envoy to see the Chinese now and say, there is a red line. We are not going to sit back and have our people targeted by this regime, and you can do something about it. And if you don't do something about it, you're going to have to live with the results. Yes, we have to protect Americans before we worry about anything else out here.
I want to bring in CNN's Kyung-la. She is in Tokyo, and global affairs correspondent Elise Labott. She joins me here now in Washington. Elise, certainly some very tough talk from John Kasich. Quite a vow to make if he were to be president. We know he still has presidential ambitions, may very well challenge for the Republican nomination in 2020. But we also know that any military option in North Korea has tremendous risks for South Korea.
That's right. And that's why the president and the national security team, specifically Secretary Mattis, has favored a diplomatic option. I mean, of course, the military option is always on the table, but you've heard Mattis, you've heard the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dunford, you've heard all of the commanders say...
You heard Steve Bannon even sort of take it off the table in his exit interview, as it were.
I think he did, but I think what he meant was that the the actual strike would be unthinkable. And so, yes, of course, the president already reserves the right for military option, but certainly you've heard general upon general, commander upon commander say that the results would be catastrophic. And so that's why that's really the last resort worst case scenario, Jim. And I think
North Korea, of course, knows that. They know that, and that's part of their strategy here, is to make sure that any strike on North Korea would bring enormous cost to South Korea.
And that's why he knows that any strike, he knows that a strike on the United States would invite a strike on him. And so that's why, you know, this rhetoric has been flying around between the North Koreans and the United States for years. I think what you have now are two masters of brinksmanship that have met their match. And so neither one really knows what the other one will do, but both know that the actual military action would be the catastrophic, not just for the United States, but suicidal for the North Koreans.
Yeah, a lot of presidents and presidential candidates have been promising for years, never will North Korea get a nuclear program or missile, and here they are. Kyung, you've been traveling in the region. How nervous have U.S. allies, but also the populations in South Korea and Japan been about the elevation of the rhetoric here from North Korea, certainly, but also from the U.S.?
Well, frankly, the big wild card here this year is Donald Trump and his rhetoric, that the expectation of this region was that the United States has been steady, has not wavered, and so the rhetoric has changed the game somewhat. But this is also a region where talk is cheap. They are used to hearing a lot of this rhetoric, just usually from North Korea, but now that you have the United States weighing in, it's the actions that really make the difference here. So what we look for after these exercises begin, and they're scheduled to begin, Jim, in just over 2 hours, as these exercises get underway, and this is something that has been happening every year since the 1970s, you look at what will North Korea do. Last year, as these exercises were taking place, we saw North Korea launch a ballistic missile from a submarine. We saw after the exercises were over its 5th and largest nuclear test. It is the actions that this region pays attention to. So, yes, the words by Donald Trump have certainly changed things a little bit, but they are still waiting to see what North Korea actually does.
But are you saying, Kyung, that your sense is that after the initial and very real nervousness from South Koreans, Japanese, etc., about Donald Trump's rhetoric, that they are, in effect, discounting that now, saying that it's not just talk from Kim, but it's talk coming from the White House?
Not necessarily that it's just talk, that things have certainly risen as far as whether or not there might be a miscalculation. Remember, this is a region where they don't necessarily expect a nuclear war to break out at any moment. But it is the idea that there might be miscalculation. That's where the concerns are. There is nervousness, but we've heard the South Korean president say that there will never be war in the peninsula. You've heard Japan's prime minister come out and reassure people here that they will do what they can to protect Japan. China weighing in, saying, okay, cooler heads need to prevail. So there is this sense that they want to try to lower the temperature.
China probably relishes that role, at least, does it not? Because frequently in the past, even pre-Donald Trump, it's had this role of sort of saying, listen, neither side can really, shouldn't go too far here, shouldn't stir the pot, etc. Are they trying to play to some degree the if not the peacemaker, the adult in the room on this?
Well, they're trying to be the adult in the room on their terms. So they want the United States to stop the exercises with South Korea, and Russia has said that as well. And then maybe we can get North Korea, they say, to stop their missile
tests. And that
tests.
serves their interests as well, Chinese and Russians, because it threatens them, they think.
That's a non-starter for the U.S. But the U.S. is saying, okay, you want to be a player, this is what you need to do. You have 90% of North Korean trade, stop it. You have a certain amount of economic, they may not have the political influence, which I think might have been overrated over the years on North Korea, specifically with Kim Jong-un. Maybe with his father, Kim Jong-il, there was a little bit more of a rational discussion. But I think it's pretty obvious that China does not have a lot of political influence on Kim Jong-un, but they do have a lot of economic influence. And the U.S. is saying, okay, you want to be the big diplomat in the room, you need to use that economic influence. And President Trump is putting a lot of pressure on the Chinese to do that.
Right. Show me, they're saying, in effect. Elise and Kyung in the region, thanks very much to both of you. The countdown begins. Crowds are gearing up for tomorrow's eclipse. We're going to hear from some folks who will be directly in the path of the ultimate sunblock. It's an amazing event. We'll be right back.
this morning, the post-Steve Bannon era begins at the White House as President Trump tries to move his agenda forward without the man who was his chief strategist. Will the staff shakeup give the president a boost at the polls? There's some brutal new numbers out there showing his approval in 3 key states that he flipped from President Obama. His approval in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin now below 40%. That's not good in political terms. Joining me now to discuss SE Cup, CNN political commentator and host of SE Cup Unfiltered, which debuts tonight. Tonight? Shoot. At 7 p.m. on HLN. Also with us, Angela Rye, CNN political commentator, former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus. And Andre Bauer, CNN political commentator, former lieutenant governor of South Carolina. SE, you're the only one launching a show today, so I'll give you the first question here. The speech tonight, the president's going to lay out his policy on Afghanistan. This is, a military decision, one with wide-ranging consequences, but it happens in a political environment that is so charged electrically right now. What are you looking for?
Well, look, if you are cynical, you could look at tonight's speech as an attempt by Trump and his administration to pivot off of a very bad couple of weeks, marked especially by the tragedy in Charlottesville. It's a chance to look presidential. War is serious. This could, in his mind, maybe make this administration look tough. He's got a chance to bring out Mattis and McMaster, and those are, as we say, a good look for the White House. But you have to also be wondering, if you're Steve Bannon, whether you're tearing your hair out at the moment, because for the Bannon wing of the Trump base, going back into Afghanistan or increasing troop levels, if he does that, this is the opposite of what Bannon's isolationism wanted to do to inform this White House. So you have to imagine there had been a battle brewing between James Mattis, who just in June had said, we are not winning the war in Afghanistan and that's about to change, and Steve Bannon, who wanted to get the heck out and has Breitbart behind him on that front.
He said, we don't even want to fight the war in Afghanistan, send private contractors to do this. Angela Rye, it strikes me that this speech, again, about very important U.S. strategic foreign policy and military deployment, happens at a time when Republican senators, including Tim Scott of South Carolina, are suggesting the president's moral authority is compromised. How does that make the challenge greater for the president tonight?
Well, I think the reality is he's got a lot to prove. You just talked about the poll numbers in 3 key states. That's still unbelievable, right, that Democrats lost. And I think that certainly Donald Trump has an opportunity to prove himself. The problem is, with every opportunity that Donald Trump gets to prove himself, he fails epically. You do hashtag epic fail. That's what he does. Doggone near every time he tweets, and certainly every time he opens his mouth. The unfortunate part to SE's point is that this is about war, and this is no laughing matter. This is not just a simple tweet or 140 characters. This is a matter of life and death, and we know folks are still certainly on the front lines, losing their lives to protect American freedom and values. So he's got a lot to prove.
Indeed, this is a policy that's been discussed and debated inside the administration for months now. By all accounts, that everyone we've heard from taken very seriously, and he is announcing it, at least so far, in an address tonight, not in 140 characters or less. Andre, I want to go to you on those polls that Angela was talking about right there, because they're striking. From these 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, not just the top line number that the president's underwater as an approval rating, but he's also underwater with key voting groups, including white, non-college educated voters, which a lot of people consider to be the crucial part of the president's base here. Look at that number there, 41% in Michigan, 44% in Pennsylvania, 38% in Wisconsin. That's a very tough number for the president with a very key part of his coalition, Andre.
It is, and I think back to a show we've done before when I started telling you how questionable the polls were, and then you called me out when I threw back up a poll that helped my cause. But you know, there is concern. Look, Donald Trump has got to be effective in Washington to really leave a legacy and to push his agenda and have a good 2018 and a good 2020. And part of that is working with the members of the United States Congress. Look, I've been in the executive and the legislative branch. You have no power if you can't get things passed. Donald Trump has got to be able to do that. He needs to forge not only bridges with Republicans, but he needs to find some key groups in the United States House and Senate as well that are on the other side of the aisle to try to get things. When you look at health care, it only lost by 1 vote in the Senate. Each vote is critical. And so when you look at his juice out in the in the neighborhoods, if he's powerful there, a lot of these folks may be more inclined to work with him. States like Michigan, where folks like Kid Rock are thinking about running for Senate, if Donald Trump's strong, it helps maybe Senator Rock. And so that makes a big difference. And in Washington, if they think that you're popular, you're going to have a better chance of getting things passed. And when we look at things in the future that he wants to have done, he's got to be able to get some monumental things passed, like the economy, trying to do something and reining in our spending that, you know, so much of the base wanted to see. But a lot of Americans, no matter what side on the aisle you're on, want to see things done. But as the economy gets better, a lot of those numbers are going to continue to get better.
Esty, I heard reaction. I don't know whether it was to the Senator Rock title.
Well, there's that. But, you know, Andre Bauer's point is correct. He's got to be able to work with members of Congress. The problem is when every member and senator return from recess, they will not be able to avoid or dodge the issue of Charlottesville. Everyone will be asked. I mean, you've seen people roaming the halls of the Capitol, journalists. That's what they're going to face. So even if there is the willingness among lawmakers and the administration to move forward on an agenda and leave all this behind, the reality is they will all be asked to either defend or condemn Trump's actions. The second they set foot back in Washington, that's going to create another headache for the president and potentially for lawmakers and his agenda.
Yeah, I don't know if you listened to the Sunday shows yesterday, but each and every one of them were essentially saying how few Republicans they could find to come on the shows at all, because no one even wanted to face questions right now. Look, I mean, in a week or two, this could be vastly different, but one of the reasons is also in the poll of these key swing states, Marist put it to people, are you proud or embarrassed of the president? And by a vast majority, people said embarrassed, but this is just among, again, the president's base, white, non-college educated voters, and majorities or near majorities, Angela, said they were embarrassed, which is an interesting word. Now, there are Democrats who are taking this even a step further, Angela, with some outright questioning the president's mental capacity right now. It's something we've heard from Jackie Spear. So from your facial expression, I take you to believe you think that's okay?
I absolutely not only think it's okay, I think that we should have been questioning that a long time ago. Look, I've talked to members of Congress on the phone about why no one has introduced legislation that calls for the psychological evaluation of every presidential candidate who seeks that higher office, including the sitting commander-in-chief. I think it's imperative, whether you're serving in the military or you're a lawyer like me who has to take a character and fitness portion of an exam to ensure that you can pass the bar. Why wouldn't we expect that for our commander-in-chief? That is a baseline expectation that you are mentally sound enough to handle the office. He continues to demonstrate his inability to do just that. So I don't see anything wrong with calling for that. I wish it would have been an expectation that we had long ago. You also talked about, John, the poll numbers, and I want to go back to that because, you know, last week we had an exchange about the polls where Ron talked about, you know, the economy's doing well and that's great. We failed to talk about the economic lag time, which can be 9 to 12 months. So this would be a hashtag thanks Obama moment. And I would say, you know, these numbers aren't surprising us.
I think you've used your limit of hashtags, Angela. Andre, they're wrapping me, Andre, but I want to give you 20 seconds to respond to Angela.
Well, number one, I think that the proof's in the pudding. Look at the fundraising dollars between the Republicans and the Democrats. Tom Perez is a good friend of mine, but they're not getting it done. And so that is another indicator of where we are in confidence. People feel good about what's going on within the Republican Party. They see change happening. They see new job numbers. They see the stock market at an all-time high. They are getting some of the results they so desperately wanted. And so the proof's in the pudding and in the dollars.
All right, Angela Rye, Andre Bauer, Esty Cup. Good luck tonight, Esty.
Thanks.
All right, coming up for us, the search is underway for 10, the search underway for 10 U.S. sailors after another U.S. Navy ship is in a collision at sea. Next, we're going to ask a former Secretary of Navy what needs to be done.
Tonight,